This video is an excerpt from a much longer Italy travel talk. To view other topics or to watch my Italy talk in its entirety, visit ricksteves.com or check out my Rick Steves YouTube channel. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk about Florence. And Florence is really the art capital of Europe. Florence, of course, is famous as the host of the Renaissance, the epicenter of that cultural explosion that happened about 600 years ago, bringing Europe out of the Middle Ages and into the modern age. And it happened in Florence for good reason. Florence was the most urban part of Europe. Florence had a banking business going on. Florence had lots of trade happening. Florence was the most literate and educated part of Europe. And Florence was sitting on the rubble of ancient Rome. They were painfully aware that they were in a middle time, and it was greater in the ancient times, and when they can get their act together, Florence can kindle that renaissance, or the rebirth of the greatness of ancient Rome. Also in Florence, you've got this amazing situation where you got all these geniuses all going to almost like the same high school. Imagine, Florence, the class of 1500. When you go to Florence, because of all that, you've got a lot of great sightseeing. Florence is built on the Arno River. You got the main part of the city, and you got the wrong side of the tracks, or the Ultra Arno, the wrong side of the river. And I do want to remind you, in the United States, we think of the wrong side of the tracks, but that's because trains brought in the business and the whole, economic vitality. In Europe, the equivalent of the trains was towns that were born not in the age of rail, but in the Middle Ages, when the safe and logical and efficient way to get your goods to town was on a river. So towns grew up on rivers. Rivers provided the power of the day. And on the other side of the river would be where the rough and tumble community would be, outside of the controlled and safe trade area, where you could have minorities and Jews and people that didn't fit in with the mainstream, okay? And that morphed over time to be the creative zone. And in Florence, you've got the Ultra Arno. In Rome, you've got Trastevere. In Paris, you've got the Latin Quarter. In Sevilla, you've got Triana. All over Europe, you'll find that river and the wrong side of the tracks. Don't miss Ultra Arno when you're in Florence. When you look at these towns, it's important to remember that in the Middle Ages, they were contained within a wall. Today, it can be way too sprawling and overwhelming, but in your mind, take some scissors and cut around and just focus on what's within that fortification, because that's where 90% of your sightseeing is. And then it becomes very accessible on foot. Here you got your wall going out from the river. On the other side of the wall would be Ultra Arno, and then within the wall would be the core of the city, and in the center of that you would have a great cathedral. In modern times, when the city is expanded beyond the protection of their wall, and when you have centralized nation states where you got stability and you don't have people, threatening your town, the walls were just a waste of important space. They were ingrown. You had a lot of traffic congestion. What do? Tear down the wall, and you got yourself a circular boulevard. When you look at the map in Florence today, you can see a circular boulevard going out from the wall, going out from the river. That used to be the wall. And then the old gates that would herald, the exit of the city in the direction of this or that town. Those gates today decorate little traffic circles and small parks that would decorate the circular road that goes around the city. That helps you get your brain around a city. It becomes less overwhelming and easier to tackle. So here we see a schematic of Florence, and you can arrive at the train station in the upper left-hand corner. And within about a 15-minute walk, you can get yourself down to the cathedral, called the Duomo in Italian, and then right down the main drag of the city to the Piazza Della Signoria. That would be the city hall square, the main square, which faces the river. Everything here is within 20, 30-minute walk of each other, and the city is delightful on foot. And recently, the city government has made the center of town very car-unfriendly, meaning very pedestrian-friendly. Consequently, we cannot get our tour buses to our hotel anymore. I love it. We have to park at the edge of this old town and walk in with our bags. That's a beautiful thing. Now, when you walk down the streets in Florence, you have to dodge bicycles, and you can hear birds tweeting. In the old days, you were crushed against a big stone wall and a tiny sidewalk with trucks and traffic ruling the city. A huge change and a great improvement for that wonderful city. The core of Florence is the Duomo, and the Duomo is It is the inspiration of the architectural Renaissance. When Michelangelo built his dome in Rome, he said, I can build a dome bigger, but not more beautiful than the dome in my hometown of Florence. The dome designed by Brunelleschi, again, that kicked off the architectural Renaissance back in the 15th century. Now, you can go to the top of that dome, you can go inside of that church, or you can climb to the bell tower next to the dome. This shot is taken from the bell tower. You can see on the top of that dome a bunch of tourists. It's quite a tight squeeze to get to the top of the dome. You can certainly do it, but it is claustrophobic, and I find it's just overwhelming with crowds. It's a long line to get up, and invariably there's some crude big Italian in a t-shirt that just loves to rub on people as they squeeze by him, all right? So halfway up, you don't have any choice. If you want not the romance or the excitement of climbing the dome, but just a practical climb, go to the bell tower instead of the dome. Either offer a great view. Looking down from the bell tower, you see the baptistry is a freestanding structure outside of the cathedral. A reminder that in the Middle Ages, you could not go into the cathedral until you were baptized, so you had to have the baptistry outside. Baptistries are very important in historic buildings in towns like this, and in this baptistry, you've got the famous Gates of Paradise, the wonderful gates designed by Ghiberti that inspired so much of the Renaissance. Remember, when we're looking at these kind of art masterpieces, these were opportunities for local artists to really contribute to their city. There was a lot of local pride. Florence was competing with all of its neighboring city-states, and here they would say, we got to have new gates on our baptistry. Let's have a competition, and the greatest artist of our generation will design these, and it'll be the glory of the city, you know? And we have now artists that are combining math and science in order to give you a believable three-dimensional scene on a two-dimensional surface. Radical break. Now they really want to show realism instead of simple 2D symbolism like in the Middle Ages. And Florence, in a lot of ways, was the birthplace of that, and that's where we find the Renaissance. Of course, the most famous piece from the Florentine Renaissance would be Michelangelo's David. And when you're looking into the eyes of David, you're really looking into the eyes of Renaissance man. Now, when we look into the eyes of David, we see this is a civilized, thinking, faithful individual, sizing up the bully, the giant, the darkness of the Middle Ages, the crudeness of the neighboring city-states. And he's going to overcome that challenge with his sling. If you look at David, the hand of David is too big and too developed, intentional by Michelangelo. This is the hand of God. It wasn't the boy that slayed the giant. It was the boy with his faith in God that was able to overcome his adversary. And that was symbolic of Florence rising above its crude, bully neighboring city-states as well, an apt mascot for the city. Understand the context of the art, why it was made, who made it, what was going on, what was the agenda, and your art comes to life. This is the kind of stuff we love to teach in our tours. This is the sort of the joy of being a tour guide. After 25 years of leading groups around Europe, I've learned what people need to know and what they don't need to know. And I've written a book called Europe 101, which is a fun and practical sweep through the story of Europe from the pyramids to Picasso, designed for your sightseeing in mind. This was written for smart people who were sleeping in their history and art classes before they knew they were going to Europe. Now you got a trip coming up and you wish you remembered what came first, Gothic or Romanesque. Just a little background on that, and you can step into a Gothic cathedral, excitedly nudge your partner and say, isn't this a marvelous improvement over Romanesque? Imagine being excited about Romanesque. You can do it with a little information. You don't need to be a scholar. You don't need to be a sophisticate. You just need to be curious and able to read a book. That's what I'm so excited about this for the value of your travels. In fact, I've made a 5-hour series of lectures, which is the same topic of this book. It's available right on our website at ricksteves.com in the Travel Talk section. You can go there, and it's a little lengthy, but it is an art history for travelers course that takes you from the Middle Ages right up until the last century. Also, I want to remind you, the app, Rick Steves Audio Europe, is full of guided tours that cover everything you need in Italy, really. Venice, Florence, Rome, and Pompeii. Really heavy on Florence because Florence is so full of great art. When you think of the Piazza, that's so Italian symbol of community. The Piazza goes all the way back to ancient Roman times. It is unique in a lot of ways to Italy. Italy embraces that whole Piazza hub of the community idea. And in Florence, you've got a wonderful Piazza Della Signoria, right on the main square in front of the city hall. And when you're there, you're looking up at the fortified city hall. And next to that, just to the right, is the Uffizi Gallery. The Uffizi Gallery, that two-tone building in the background there, Uffizi is literally the offices. This was the offices of the Medici who ruled from that big city hall. There's a sky bridge that connects the Medici's office with the offices of the city. Today, the Uffizi it hosts the greatest collection of Italian paintings anywhere. This is the must-see museum in Florence for Italian art. Here's the courtyard of the Uffizi Gallery in the evening, and that's the courtyard in the day. It's a reminder you should be out at night enjoying Florence without the insanity. Every two-bit tourist wants to go to the Uffizi, and every two-bit tourist wants to see David. You're in there with the whole world, and it's not designed for those kind of crowds, and it's overwhelming. You got to do it. Find a way to minimize the stress and the crowds and the time wasting. It's worth it. There are ways to get around that, but this is the line for the Uffizi Gallery. It's there every day. It goes all the way around the block, and the typical tourist just stumbles in, goes to the end of the line, and spends 2 hours trying to get through the door. You can get around that line. It's very straightforward. In my guidebook, I've got a guidebook on Florence that gives you all the details. Just make a reservation, and you walk right by all those people. Don't say anything too smart-aleck, and you go straight to the door. You show them your appointment, and they let you in. You've enjoyed the Uffizi Gallery, and they're out of there before these poor people who have one day in their life in Florence and spend a third of it waiting to get in before they get to the door. Please, make a reservation for David. Make a reservation for the Uffizi, and then you can enjoy the great Botticellis. And you can be surrounded by all those beautiful Michelangelo prisoners and so on. And with your little background, you can understand what was going on in those heady days. Back when it was very tentative. You wanted to celebrate the body, but at first you had to do the body in biblical terms. On the left is the Virgin Mary, and on the right is Venus. And when they were bold enough to have the body, that was quite something. And then when they were bold enough to have the body away from a biblical context, that was something else. And then after that, they were bold enough to have a male nude standing in a rich person's courtyard. Just fancy, beautiful stuff for some rich guy with no apologies necessary. Humanism, the triumph of the Renaissance. And you see that whole evolution when you travel in Florence. The Bargello is to statues what the Uffizi is to paintings. You really got to balance that. If there's 2 museums to see, you got to go to the Uffizi, and many less crowds go to the Bargello, where you see some incredible statues. The most underrated museum in Florence is the Museum of the Duomo, and that is the Museum of the Cathedral. It's directly behind the cathedral. It's got incredible statues and no crowds for some quirky reason, including an amazing Michelangelo Pietà. Michelangelo did 3 or 4 Pietas. You can see most of his work in Rome, Florence, and Milan. And in Florence, you can see, of course, David and the prisoners, but you'll also want to see his Pietà at the Museum of the Duomo. Florence has all sorts of historic churches. Inside the churches, you've got a great chance to see Renaissance architecture, beautiful symmetry, beautiful mathematically correct rhythmic architectural lines. And in the churches, you can track the evolution of great art from medieval, pointed arches, gold leaf backgrounds, lots of halos, until you get to the Renaissance, where you have mathematical perspective, balance, symmetry, and that realism that we celebrate from the 15th century onward. When you're in Florence, it's a great shopping town, and leather is the big deal. There's plenty of opportunities to do some leather shopping there. The big news for eating in Florence, I think, is the Mercato Centrale. The old industrial age iron and glass market was getting run down, kind of depressed, like they were all over Europe. And all over Europe, what I've seen is a revitalization of these great industrial age marketplaces by turning them into food courts. And this is really a foodie's paradise. When you're in Florence, go to the Mercato Centrale for lunch. It's a great idea. I mentioned Florence is becoming much more pedestrian-friendly. What streets that used to be just completely the domain of trucks and buses and cars are now motorbikes, bicycles, and pedestrians. The Ponte Vecchio is the old bridge, literally. It goes across the Arno River, and in good medieval style, it's lined with shops. So you've got all these beautiful shops, and they are the jewelers' shops today. And you can go across at night and enjoy some beautiful music. I find the evening in Florence to be very charming and romantic. The city government has done a great job of controlling the quality and the placement of the buskers. So you've got concert quality musicians out on the streets at night, and I'd love to spend the evening just with a good travel partner and some gelato enjoying the street music. When you cross the Arno River, crossing the Ponte Vecchio, within 5 minutes you are in that ultra Arno district. Remember I was talking about the earthy, crusty alternative to the main center where all the power and the money was? The ultra Arno is where you go today for trendy little foodie restaurants, artisans doing their thing, and colorful little back lanes and beautiful squares. Ultra Arno, be sure to factor that in to your Florentine travels. Florence, boy, Florence is a small town with a great history, and the more you prepare for Florence, and it deserves the preparation because of all the crowds, the more you'll enjoy it. If you've enjoyed this video, you'll find lots more at ricksteves.com and on my Rick Steves YouTube channel. Happy travels, and thanks for joining us.